The gavel slammed down so hard that the echo rang through the entire courtroom. The air went still, and for a brief moment, no one moved. "Mr. Daniels, I hereby sentence you to 558 days for contempt of court," Judge Harrison declared, his voice cold as ice. Gasps filled the room. Some people whispered in shock. Others just sat there, frozen in disbelief. No one had ever seen anything like this before. A contempt sentence this long? It was unheard of. But the most shocking part was the man standing at the defendant's table, Jacob Daniels. He smirked, as if this whole thing was some kind of joke. "That's cute, Judge. Real cute," Jacob sneered, folding his arms. "You think I'm scared? You think I care? Man, please." Silence. No one even breathed. Judge Harrison leaned forward, eyes dark with warning. "You don't get to talk in my courtroom like that, Mr. Daniels. And if you say one more word—" Jacob laughed, loud and cocky. "What? You gonna give me more days? Please. You already handed out some record-breaking nonsense." Bam! The gavel slammed down again, cutting him off. "Make that 700 days, the judge snapped. Now the room wasn't just silent. It was dead silent. The kind of silence that made the hairs on your neck stand up. Jacob's smirk faded. His jaw clenched. For the first time, he looked unsure. The reality hit him. He had just talked himself into nearly 2 years behind bars, and it was getting worse by the second. And just like that, the courtroom erupted into chaos. It hadn't always been like this. A few months ago, Jacob Daniels was just another man trying to survive in the streets of Chicago. He wasn't exactly the most honest person, but he wasn't the worst either. He had made mistakes, bad ones that put him in front of Judge Harrison in the first place. But if you asked Jacob, he wasn't the villain in his own story. It all started on a cold January night. The wind howled through the city, biting at anyone foolish enough to be outside. Jacob, however, wasn't just outside. He was running. The sound of sirens screamed behind him. His breath was short, his chest burning. His sneakers slapped against the pavement as he tore down the alley. He had to get away. This wasn't supposed to happen. It was just a job. A simple break-in. Nothing violent. Just some easy cash. But then everything went wrong. He never saw the security guard coming. One moment, he was cracking open the register. The next, red and blue lights flooded the storefront. He had one choice: run. Jacob wasn't a saint, but he wasn't a monster either. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He just wanted to get what he came for and leave. But the security guard didn't see it that way. Jacob ducked into another alley, heart racing. His mind scrambled for an escape. Then, bam! The tackle hit him like a truck. His body slammed into the wet pavement, his cheek scraping against the rough ground. Before he could react, a knee pressed hard into his back. "Stay down," the officer barked. Jacob struggled, but it was useless. The cold steel of handcuffs locked around his wrists. And just like that, it was over. He was caught. A week later, Jacob sat in a freezing jail cell, staring at the ceiling. The trial was coming up fast, and things weren't looking good. The prosecution wanted 5 years for breaking and entering, plus additional charges for resisting arrest. Jacob felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. 5 years? For what? A couple $100? It wasn't fair. But fair didn't matter in the courtroom. He needed a way out. That's when he met Charlie Greer. Charlie was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s, who had spent most of his life in and out of jail. But he wasn't like the others. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry. He just was. "You talk too much, kid," Charlie said one day, sitting across from Jacob in the common area. "That mouth of yours is gonna get you in trouble." Jacob scoffed. "Yeah? Well, I talk my way out of trouble too." Charlie chuckled, shaking his head. "No, you think you do. But when you're standing in front of that judge, trust me, your mouth won't save you. It'll bury you." Jacob didn't believe him. He had always been a talker. He could charm, lie, and manipulate his way out of anything. Or so he thought. The day of his trial arrived. Dressed in an old suit that barely fit, Jacob stood before Judge Harrison, the one man in the room who held his fate in his hands. The prosecution went first, laying out all the evidence against him. The security footage, the witness statements, it was bad. But Jacob wasn't worried. Then it was his turn to speak. And that's where things took a turn. It started small. Jacob didn't like the way the prosecutor twisted his words, so he interrupted. The judge gave him a warning. Then Jacob rolled his eyes. The judge warned him again. Then Jacob made a sarcastic comment under his breath. And that's when Judge Harrison slammed his gavel. "You are in contempt of court, Mr. Daniels," the judge said. Jacob laughed. "Oh, please. For what? Existing?" The judge's expression darkened. 50 days for contempt. Jacob raised an eyebrow. 50? Man, you're soft. Make that 100. Now people started whispering. This wasn't normal. But Jacob still wasn't backing down. Puffed. "What's another 100? He muttered. 200. The courtroom went still. Jacob opened his mouth again. But then he hesitated. For the first time, he realized he was losing control. But instead of stopping, he made the biggest mistake of his life. "Wow," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. 200 whole days. I bet you feel real powerful, huh, Judge? And then, BAM. 558 days, the judge declared. Jacob's heart stopped. The courtroom erupted. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of the plan. And then, just as Jacob was trying to process it all, Judge Harrison leaned forward and said, "And if you say another word, I will not hesitate to make it worse." For the first time in his life, Jacob Daniels was truly speechless. And that's when the courtroom went completely silent. But this was only the beginning. Jacob had no idea that his real punishment hadn't even started yet. The heavy metal door clanked shut behind him. The sound echoed in his head like a hammer hitting steel. Jacob Daniels stood in the middle of the intake room at Cook County Jail, hands still cuffed, his mouth pressed into a thin line. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. 558 days for contempt. For contempt. Not even for the crime itself. The break-in charges hadn't even been sentenced yet. But here he was, already looking at nearly 2 years. All because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. The guards shoved him forward. "Let's go, Daniels." Jacob didn't move right away. His mind was still reeling. Everything had happened so fast. 1 minute, he was cracking jokes in the courtroom, and the next, his entire life had changed. The weight of it hit him hard. His hands balled into fists. No, he wasn't going to break. This was just another setback. He had been through worse. He would find a way out of this. He always did. "Move it," the guard snapped, shoving him again. Jacob gritted his teeth, but stepped forward. As they led him down the cold, sterile hallway, he could hear the sounds of the jail around him. Metal bars clanking, voices yelling, the occasional burst of laughter that sounded anything but happy. This wasn't his first time locked up. He had done short stints before. A few weeks here, a month there. But this was different. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This was a punishment. And for the first time in his life, Jacob Daniels had to face the fact that maybe, just maybe, he had finally talked himself into something he couldn't escape. They threw him in a small cell with a man built like a tank. Jacob barely had time to process what was happening before the cell door slammed shut behind him. His new cellmate sat on the bottom bunk, arms crossed, watching him with cold, unreadable eyes. Jacob swallowed. "Great. So, you're the guy," the man finally said, his voice deep and rough. Jacob frowned. "What guy?" The man smirked. "The idiot who got almost 2 years for mouthing off to a judge." Jacob's stomach dropped. People already knew. News spread fast in jail. But this? It hadn't even been an hour. The man leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That's legendary, man." Jacob blinked. "Legendary?" The man laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah. Stupid, but legendary." He held out a hand. "Name's Big Ray." Jacob hesitated. Then, slowly, he shook his hand. At least Big Ray didn't seem like the kind of guy who would kill him in his sleep. That was a plus. "You got any enemies in here?" Ray asked casually, stretching his arms behind his head. Jacob shrugged. "Not that I know of." Ray snorted. "You will." Jacob frowned. "Why?" Ray gave him a look, like he was talking to the dumbest man alive. "Because you embarrassed a judge. You don't think some of the COs got friends in high places? You think they're just gonna let you ride this sentence out easy?" Jacob hadn't thought about that. The judge had humiliated him in front of the entire courtroom, but Jacob had humiliated the judge, too. And people like Judge Harrison? They didn't forget things like that. Jacob clenched his jaw. This wasn't going to be a normal jail sentence. It was going to be hell. It didn't take long for things to get bad. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. Jacob kept his head down, tried to stay out of trouble. But the correctional officers had other plans. They accidentally forgot to bring him lunch one day. The next, they misplaced his bedding, leaving him to sleep on the cold, hard mattress with nothing but his jumpsuit. Little things. Small annoyances. But then it escalated. On the 5th day, during rec time, Jacob was out in the yard when 3 guys cornered him. Big Ray was nowhere in sight. Jacob knew right away this wasn't random. These guys weren't just looking for a fight. They were sent. The tallest one, a bald guy with tattoos snaking up his neck, stepped forward first. "You think you're funny, huh?" Jacob didn't answer. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face blank. "Judge Harrison ain't happy with you," the guy continued. "And when the judge ain't happy, people like us gotta make sure the message gets sent." Jacob's fist clenched. He wasn't the biggest guy, but he could fight if he had to. And right now, he had to. Tattoo Neck lunged first. Jacob dodged to the side, just barely missing the punch. But before he could react, the second guy, a stocky dude with a mean grin, swung a fist straight into Jacob's gut. Pain exploded in his ribs. Jacob stumbled back, gasping for air. No time to recover. The third guy grabbed him from behind, locking his arms. Tattoo Neck stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "This is gonna hurt, Daniels." Jacob braced himself. Then boom. A massive body slammed into the group, knocking them apart like bowling pins. It was Big Ray. "Pick on someone your own size," Ray growled. The stocky guy scrambled up, ready to charge. But before he could move, a whistle blew. COs flooded the yard. Jacob, still gasping for air, knew exactly what was about to happen. They weren't going to punish the guys who jumped him. They were going to punish him. And he was right. 5 minutes later, he was dragged to solitary confinement. The door slammed shut, trapping him inside. A small, cold, windowless room. No bed. No toilet. Nothing but 4 concrete walls and the sound of his own breathing. His chest still ached from the punch. His mind raced. They had set him up. And if they were willing to throw him in solitary for defending himself, what else were they willing to do? Jacob leaned his head back against the wall. For the first time since his sentence began, he felt it. Fear. This wasn't just jail. This was payback. And if he didn't figure out a way to survive this, he wasn't getting out in one piece. Jacob sat in the freezing darkness of the solitary cell, his arms wrapped around his knees. No light. No sound. No way to know how much time had passed. His stomach twisted with hunger. His lips felt dry and cracked. His body ached from the fight in the yard. But worst of all, his mind was unraveling. Solitary confinement did that. It didn't break you with violence. It broke you with silence. How long had he been in here? A day? 2? More? He had no idea. The worst part was the waiting. Was the door going to open? Was someone going to come in? Was this it? At first, he thought maybe they'd let him out after a few hours. A slap on the wrist, a warning. But no, they wanted to make him suffer. This wasn't about punishment anymore. This was personal. And Jacob Daniels was finally starting to understand just how much trouble he was really in. He should have listened to Charlie. That thought kept playing in his head, over and over again. He remembered the old man's words from the jail common area before his trial. "That mouth of yours is gonna get you in trouble. You don't talk your way out of everything. One day you're gonna push the wrong person too far. Judges don't forget." Jacob had laughed back then. He thought Charlie was just some washed-up convict, spouting nonsense. But now he understood. Judge Harrison hadn't just sentenced him out of anger. He had sent a message, not just to Jacob, but to everyone who thought about disrespecting his courtroom. And now the judge's friends were making sure that message stuck. Jacob squeezed his eyes shut. He wouldn't let them break him. No matter what, he had to hold on. At some point, he had no idea when, the cell door finally opened. The sudden burst of light stabbed into his eyes, making him wince. A CO stood in the doorway, arms crossed, staring down at him like he was nothing. Had enough yet, Daniels? The guard asked. Jacob didn't answer. He just squinted up at him, his throat too dry to even form words. The CO smirked. That's what I thought. They dragged him out, barely giving him time to catch his footing. His legs were weak from being locked in that box for days. When they finally brought him back to the general population, Big Ray was waiting for him. The big man looked him over, his usual smirk gone. They messed you up bad, huh? Jacob didn't answer right away. He was still trying to process everything. The way the guards had looked at him, like he was already dead. They weren't just doing this for fun. They wanted him gone. And that meant he had two choices. Survive. Or get buried. Jacob changed after that. He wasn't dumb. He knew he couldn't afford to play the same game anymore. So, he stayed quiet. No more backtalk. No more sarcasm. He did what he was told. Kept his head down. Tried to be invisible. But the thing about Cook County Jail was, you were never really invisible. No matter how much Jacob tried to stay out of trouble, trouble found him. It started with the food tray incident. Jacob was sitting in the cafeteria, minding his business, when one of the COs dumped his entire tray of food onto the floor. On purpose. The room went silent. Everyone was watching. The guard just stood there, smirking down at Jacob, waiting, daring him to react. Jacob clenched his fists, his body burning with anger. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. The CO chuckled. Smart. And then he walked away. Jacob didn't even bother asking for another tray. He just went hungry that night. And the next. And the next. Because this wasn't about food. This was about breaking him. The second incident was worse. It was a setup. One night, Jacob was dragged out of his bunk by two guards. Before he could say a word, they tossed a shank at his feet. Jacob's blood ran cold. The guards grinned. Looks like contraband to me. Jacob's mind raced. If they wrote this up, he'd get more time added to his sentence. Maybe even get transferred to a maximum security prison. His pulse pounded in his ears. He could try to fight it, but against guards? It would be his word against theirs. And no one was going to believe a guy who had already been labeled a troublemaker. Jacob stayed silent. And, just like that, the guards laughed and walked away, leaving the shank on the ground like a warning. Next time, they might not just leave it there. Next time, they might use it. Jacob wasn't safe here. He had to get out. But he couldn't. Because no matter how badly he wanted to fight back, no matter how much he wanted to scream, he knew the truth. Judge Harrison had set him up to fail. And the only way out of this? He had to outlast them. He had to survive. No matter what. And then, the riot happened. It started with a fight in the yard. Two rival gangs, screaming, fists flying. Jacob wasn't part of it. But that didn't matter. Because when one of the guards panicked and called for backup, everything went to hell. Sirens blared. Guards rushed in. Tear gas filled the air. And before Jacob could even react, he was caught in the chaos. A huge guy, twice his size, charged at him, swinging wildly. Jacob barely dodged the first punch. The second one? He didn't dodge in time. A fist slammed into his ribs, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain exploded through his chest. He gasped, struggling to breathe. But the guy wasn't done. Jacob rolled to the side, trying to crawl away. But then, bam! Someone stomped on his head. His vision flashed white. The noise around him faded. His ears rang. And then, everything went black. Jacob drifted in and out of consciousness. Voices. Shouting. The sound of boots stomping against concrete. Pain. A deep, throbbing pain that spread through his skull, his ribs, his entire body. He felt like he had been hit by a truck, but he couldn't move, couldn't open his eyes. Then, cold water. A bucket of it, dumped over his head. Jacob gasped, jerking upright, his body screaming in pain. His vision blurred, but through the haze, he saw the dim glow of fluorescent lights. He wasn't in the yard anymore. He was in the infirmary. A CO stood over him, the empty bucket still in his hand. Wake up, Daniels. Your nap's over. Jacob groaned, blinking hard, trying to shake the fog in his brain. His head pounded like a drum. His ribs ached with every breath. But he was alive. He was still here, and that meant they hadn't finished him off yet. The guard smirked down at him. Next time, you might not be so lucky. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Jacob alone with the pain. Hours passed, maybe even a day. Jacob wasn't sure. He stayed in the infirmary, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the prison. Metal doors slamming, distant shouts, the occasional scream. His body was too broken to move, but his mind was racing. That riot wasn't an accident. It was a perfect opportunity. Judge Harrison's people couldn't just kill him outright, not without drawing attention. But in a riot, anything could happen. If Big Ray hadn't pulled him out of the fight, Jacob wouldn't be breathing right now. That thought sent a chill through him. He had always thought he could talk his way out of anything. Always thought he was untouchable. But now he understood something. This wasn't about his mouth anymore. This was about survival. 2 days later, they sent him back to general population. His head still throbbed. His ribs were bruised. But the moment he walked into the cell block, he felt it, the eyes on him. Everyone had heard what happened. Big Ray was waiting for him by their cell, arms crossed. Took you long enough. Jacob smirked, but it hurt. Miss me? Ray snorted. Not really. But I was starting to wonder if you were ever coming back. Jacob leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. Me too. Ray studied him for a moment. You get it now? Jacob frowned. Get what? Ray's voice dropped lower. That this ain't about your sentence, man. It ain't about what you did. It's about what you said, who you pissed off. And the fact that you're still breathing? That's a problem for some people. Jacob already knew that, but hearing it out loud made it worse. Ray continued. You keep thinking this is a game. You're gonna end up in a box. Jacob looked away. He didn't want to die here. But right now, that was exactly what was going to happen if he didn't do something. That night, Jacob lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't keep doing this. If he just kept his head down, they'd still come for him. If he fought back, they'd bury him faster. He needed a different way out. And then, an idea hit him. It was risky. It was stupid. But it was the only chance he had. Jacob turned to Ray, his voice low. I need to get in touch with a lawyer. Ray raised an eyebrow. You got money for a lawyer? Jacob exhaled. No, but I got something better. Ray smirked. What's that? Jacob's eyes hardened. Leverage. The next morning, Jacob made his move. He walked straight up to C.O. McAllister, one of the dirtiest guards in the prison, the one who had planted the shank in his cell, and looked him dead in the eye. I need a phone call, Jacob said. McAllister laughed. You don't get special treatment, Daniels. Jacob smirked. No, but I do have insurance. The guard's smile faded. What the hell are you talking about? Jacob leaned in. I know what you did. McAllister's expression darkened. I know who sent you, Jacob continued. And I know that if something happens to me, there's a letter sitting with someone outside this prison. With all the details, the guard's jaw tightened. Jacob kept his voice steady. So, here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna let me make that phone call. And in return, I won't burn this whole place down. McAllister didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded once. Jacob knew then. He had just bought himself a fighting chance. An hour later, he sat in the small, dimly lit phone room, the receiver pressed to his ear. The line rang once, twice, then, a voice. Hello? Jacob took a slow breath. It's me, he said. A pause. Then, Jacob. It was Sarah, his older sister. The one person in the world who still cared whether he lived or died. Jacob swallowed hard. I need your help. Sarah didn't waste time. You're an idiot, she snapped. Jacob smirked. Nice to hear your voice too. She sighed. What did you do now? Jacob hesitated. Then, he told her everything. The courtroom disaster. The contempt sentence. The setup in prison. The near-death experience in the riot. And most importantly, the fact that Judge Harrison wasn't going to let him leave this place alive. Sarah was silent for a long time. Then, finally, she spoke. We need to get you out of there. Jacob exhaled. Yeah. No kidding. Sarah's voice hardened. I'm calling a lawyer. Jacob shook his head. I don't have money for a lawyer. You don't need money, Sarah said. You need someone who hates Judge Harrison as much as you do. Jacob frowned. And who the hell would that be? Sarah's voice went cold. Oh, I have an idea. Jacob sat up. Sarah continued. Judge Harrison isn't as clean as he pretends to be. Jacob's pulse sped up. What do you know? He asked. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Let's just say, you're not the first person he's tried to bury. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. And just like that, the game had changed. Jacob gripped the phone receiver tighter, his pulse hammering in his ears. What do you mean I'm not the first? He asked, his voice low, urgent. Sarah hesitated. I don't have all the details yet, she admitted. But I know this isn't the first time Judge Harrison has pulled something like this. He's got a history of handing down insanely long contempt sentences, especially to people he doesn't like. Jacob's jaw tightened. You saying he's got a personal hit list? Something like that, Sarah said. He doesn't just throw the book at people. He buries them. And not just in prison. Some people? They disappear. A chill ran through Jacob. He thought this was just about him mouthing off in court. A judge with an ego. A guy who got mad and wanted to teach him a lesson. But if what Sarah was saying was true, this was bigger than that. This was about power. This was about control. And Jacob was just the latest guy caught in the crossfire. Tell me everything you know, Jacob said. Sarah exhaled. There was this guy, Elliot Ford. Same judge. Same situation. He was in court for a probation violation. Said something Harrison didn't like. Got slapped with a ridiculous contempt sentence. Jacob swallowed. How long? Sarah's voice dropped. 1,000 days. Jacob's stomach twisted. That was nearly 3 years. For contempt. Not even a crime. Jacob had thought his sentence was bad. But this? What happened to him? Jacob asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, her next words hit like a gut punch. He died in prison. Jacob froze. Died? Or was he killed? The receiver felt heavy in Jacob's hand. His brain raced, connecting the dots. If Judge Harrison was handing out insanely long contempt sentences to certain people, and those people were dying in prison, then Jacob was already on borrowed time. He needed to act fast. Sarah, Jacob said, forcing himself to stay calm. Find out everything you can about Elliot Ford. Who his lawyer was, who his family was, anyone who might be willing to talk. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'm already on it. Jacob exhaled. And Sarah? Yeah. Jacob's voice hardened. Don't trust anyone. The moment Jacob hung up, he knew things were about to get dangerous. Because if Judge Harrison really was covering up something bigger, and if Sarah started digging, then someone was going to come for her too. And he couldn't protect her from in here. He had to think. Fast. He turned to Big Ray, who was sitting on his bunk, watching him carefully. Well? Ray asked. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. I think I just started a war. Ray smirked. Good. About time. The next few days were tense. Jacob kept his head down. He didn't pick fights. He didn't draw attention. But he waited. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone made a move. And then, on the 4th night, it happened. Jacob was asleep when the sound of the cell door unlocking snapped him awake. It wasn't time for count. Something was wrong. Before he could sit up, 3 shadows rushed into the cell. No words. No hesitation. Just violence. The first punch caught him across the jaw, sending his head whipping to the side. Jacob tried to roll off the bunk, but someone grabbed him, pinning him down. A hand wrapped around his throat, squeezing. Jacob kicked out, connecting with something solid. The grip loosened, just enough for him to wrench free. Then, bam! A fist slammed into his ribs, knocking the wind out of him. Pain shot through his body. He gasped, struggling to stay conscious. Then he saw it. The glint of something sharp. A blade. His pulse spiked. This wasn't just a beating. They were here to kill him. Jacob reacted on instinct. He jerked to the side, just as the shank came stabbing down. It sliced across his arm, instead of his throat. Pain exploded, but he didn't stop moving. He fought like his life depended on it. Because it did. He kicked. He swung. He bit. He did whatever it took to stay alive. Then boom. A massive force slammed into the attackers, Big Ray. Ray grabbed the guy with the knife, and threw him like a rag doll. Another guy charged, but Ray caught him by the throat and slammed him against the wall. The third guy ran. The fight was over in seconds. Jacob lay on the floor, breathing hard, his arm bleeding, his head spinning. Ray stood over him, shaking his head. "They're getting desperate," he muttered. Jacob forced himself to sit up. His vision blurred, but his mind was clear. He wasn't just a nuisance anymore. He was a target, and that meant one thing. He was getting too close to the truth. Jacob pressed his hand against his bleeding arm, his breathing still ragged. He looked up at Ray. "We need to move faster," Jacob said. Ray nodded. "Yeah, and we need to figure out who sent them." Jacob already knew, but now he needed proof. Because if he could expose Judge Harrison, if he could prove that this wasn't just about contempt, but about something bigger, then maybe, just maybe, he had a way out of this. The next morning, a guard approached Jacob's cell. "You got a visitor." Jacob's stomach tightened. He wasn't expecting anyone. He exchanged a glance with Ray before stepping out. The guards led him down the hall, past the rows of cells, past the main block, until he was seated at the visitor's table. And when he saw who was waiting for him, his blood ran cold. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't a lawyer. It was a man in a gray suit, his face unreadable. Jacob had never met him before, but he recognized the look in his eyes. Power, control, a warning. The man folded his hands on the table. Then, in a calm, even voice, he said, "You need to stop what you're doing, Mr. Daniels, ****. Jacob's stomach twisted, because that was when he realized this wasn't just about Judge Harrison anymore. This was bigger, and if he kept pushing, he might not make it out alive. Jacob sat across from the man in the gray suit, his mind racing. He had no idea who this guy was, but he knew exactly what he represented: power, corruption, and a warning. The man folded his hands on the table, his face unreadable. "You've made quite a mess for yourself, Mr. Daniels." Jacob forced himself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man smiled. It was cold, calculated. "Yes, you do." Jacob's pulse spiked. This wasn't just about his contempt sentence anymore. This was about something much bigger. The man leaned forward slightly. "Do you know why you're still alive, Mr. Daniels?" Jacob's throat tightened. Because someone wanted him dead. Because they had already tried to kill him, twice. And now, instead of another attempt, this guy was here instead. That meant he was getting too close to something dangerous. Jacob kept his expression blank. "Enlighten me." The man tilted his head. "Because you're useful." Jacob clenched his jaw. "Useful for what?" The man's smile didn't change. "You're loud." Jacob froze. "You make noise," the man continued. "You don't know when to stop. And that's exactly what we need." Jacob's stomach twisted. He had expected a threat, a warning to shut up or die. But this was something else entirely. The man sat back, his gaze never leaving Jacob's. "You're asking questions about Judge Harrison. You're digging where you shouldn't." Jacob didn't say anything. "Most men in your situation would be dead by now," the man continued. "And you should be." Jacob's hands curled into fists under the table. "But you're not." Silence stretched between them. Jacob's heart pounded. Then the man said something that made his blood run cold. "Because we want you to keep going." Jacob's entire body went rigid. This wasn't just about getting rid of him. Someone, whoever this man worked for, wanted him to keep pushing, to keep digging, to keep making noise. But why? Jacob forced himself to speak. "And who exactly is we?" The man chuckled. "Let's just say we don't like Harrison much either." Jacob narrowed his eyes. This wasn't adding up. Judge Harrison clearly had powerful people in his pocket, people willing to kill for him. But this guy, he wasn't here to kill Jacob. He was here to use him. Jacob leaned forward. "And what happens if I stop?" The man's smile vanished. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then you die." The words sent a chill through Jacob's entire body. He had no choice. This wasn't just about getting out of prison anymore. It was about staying alive. Jacob exhaled slowly. "So what now?" The man in the gray suit reached into his pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper. He slid it across the table. Jacob hesitated before picking it up. It was a name and a phone number. The man stood. If you want to live, you call that number. Jacob's stomach twisted. Who is it? The man's eyes darkened. Someone who wants Judge Harrison gone just as much as we do. Then he turned and walked away. Jacob sat there, staring at the paper, his hands clammy. This was it. This was his way out. But as he looked at the name written on the paper, one thing was clear. Whatever he was about to step into was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. And once he made that call, there was no turning back. The guards escorted Jacob back to his cell, but his mind was still spinning. Big Ray was waiting for him, arms crossed. Well? Ray asked. Who was the suit? Jacob hesitated. Then, slowly, he sat down on his bunk and handed Ray the slip of paper. Ray took one look at the name and let out a low whistle. Oh man, Jacob frowned. You know who this is? Ray nodded, his expression grim. Yeah, and if they're reaching out to you. He exhaled sharply. That means things just got serious. Jacob's pulse quickened. Who is it? He asked again. Ray's eyes locked onto his. This? Ray said, holding up the slip of paper. This is the guy who tried to take down Judge Harrison 10 years ago. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. Ray leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. And guess what? Jacob swallowed hard. What? Ray's expression turned dark. Harrison destroyed him. The realization hit Jacob like a freight train. Whoever this guy was, he was Harrison's biggest enemy, but Harrison had already beaten him once. And now? Now, this guy wanted Jacob to take another shot at him. Jacob felt a shiver crawl down his spine. He was about to walk straight into a war. And if he wasn't careful, he wouldn't make it out alive. That night, Jacob lay awake on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. His ribs still ached. His head still pounded. But none of that mattered, because he knew, deep down, that he had already made his choice. He was going to make that call. He was going to find out everything about Judge Harrison, and he was going to take him down, not just for himself, but for everybody else Harrison had buried. Jacob exhaled slowly. Then, just before he drifted off to sleep, the cell door creaked open again. Jacob's eyes snapped open, his body instantly tense. This wasn't rec time. This wasn't count. Someone was coming for him. Again. Jacob clenched his fists, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, a shadow stepped inside the cell, and a voice whispered one chilling sentence. You don't have much time. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The shadowy figure in the cell stood just inside the door, barely visible in the dim light. His pulse hammered. His fists clenched. Who are you? Jacob whispered, keeping his voice low. The figure didn't move. Then, a flicker of light from the hallway caught his face. Jacob's stomach twisted. It was C.O. McAllister, the same guard who had planted the shank in his cell, the same guard who had tried to bury him. Jacob's blood ran cold. This wasn't good. McAllister stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have much time, Daniels. Jacob stayed still. He didn't trust this. Not for a second. Why are you here? He asked, keeping his tone steady. McAllister's jaw tightened. His usual smug expression was gone. Now, he looked tense. On edge. They're done playing with you, McAllister muttered. Jacob's pulse spiked. What does that mean? He asked. McAllister exhaled sharply, glancing at the door behind him. I shouldn't even be here, but I'm gonna give you one shot to make it out of this. Jacob narrowed his eyes. Why would you help me? McAllister's jaw clenched. For the first time, he actually looked scared. Because they're about to pin a murder on you. Jacob's body went rigid. He stared at McAllister, his mind racing. A murder, he repeated. McAllister nodded once, his face grim. Harrison's people know you're not gonna last in here much longer. They're moving to end this now. Jacob's chest tightened. You're lying, he said. But his voice lacked conviction. McAllister shook his head. No, I'm not. He stepped even closer. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a dead inmate in your cell block. And guess what? Jacob already knew. They're gonna say I did it, he whispered. McAllister nodded. They'll plant the weapon in your cell. They'll have witnesses ready to testify against you. It'll be a done deal. Jacob's hands clenched into fists. If they pulled this off, it wouldn't just be another year or two in prison. It would be life. Game over. His mind raced, searching for an angle. A way out. There's gotta be something I can do, he said. There's gotta be. McAllister cut him off. There's only one way. Jacob's pulse pounded. What? McAllister hesitated. Then, his voice lowered even more. You need to get out of here. Jacob blinked. Escape? McAllister nodded. That's your only shot. You stay here, you're dead, either in a cell or on the outside. If you want a real chance at taking Harrison down, you gotta disappear. Jacob's head spun. Escape? That was suicide. There were guards everywhere. Cameras. Barbed wire. No one just walked out of Cook County Jail. You're insane, Jacob muttered. McAllister's jaw tightened. Maybe, but it's the only move left on the board. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. This was insane. But what choice did he have? If they framed him for murder, it was over. If he tried to fight back in court, Harrison would bury him deeper. If he ran, he'd be a fugitive, hunted, chased, looking over his shoulder every second. But if he stayed, he was already dead. Jacob exhaled sharply. This was it. This was his only chance. He looked up at McAllister. How? McAllister wasted no time. You'll have a 5-minute window, he said, glancing at the door. Tomorrow night, during shift change, the cameras in the lower hallway go into a blind spot for exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds. That's all you get. Jacob's mind locked onto every detail. You're gonna go through the laundry chute in Block C, McAllister continued. It drops to the basement. From there, there's an access tunnel that leads to the loading dock. Jacob frowned. And what? I just walk out. McAllister snorted. No, that's where it gets tricky. Jacob exhaled. Of course it does. McAllister leaned in closer, voice almost deadly quiet. There's a van scheduled for pickup at 11:47 p.m. It leaves the dock and heads straight to the waste facility. You get in that van. You don't move. You don't make a sound. And if you're lucky, he smirked, you'll be outside the walls before they even realize you're gone. Jacob's mind raced. This was insane, dangerous, impossible. But it was the only shot he had. His only shot at taking down Harrison. His only shot at staying alive. Jacob looked up, locking eyes with McAllister. If this is a setup, McAllister cut him off. It's not. Jacob hesitated. Then, he made his decision. Okay, he said. Let's do it. The next 24 hours were the longest of Jacob's life. He didn't tell anyone, not even Big Ray. Too dangerous. Too many years in the prison. One slip, and he was done. He spent the day memorizing the plan, running through every detail in his head. There could be no mistakes. If this worked, he'd be free. If it didn't, he'd never make it past the chute. By the time night fell, Jacob's nerves were on fire. He waited in his cell, listening for the signal. Then, right at 11:30 p.m., McAllister walked past his door. A slight nod. That was it. Go time. Jacob's heart pounded as he slipped out of bed, moving fast. He crossed the hall, sticking to the shadows. His breath felt too loud, his body tense. Every step could be his last. He made it to Block C just as the shift change began. Now the chute. Jacob grabbed the edge, hoisting himself up. His muscles burned. Then, he dropped. For a second, he was falling. Then thud. He landed hard in a pile of laundry, the air knocking out of his lungs. No time to stop. He rolled off, hitting the floor. His hands scrambled against the ground, his legs moving before his mind caught up. The tunnel. It was just ahead. Jacob took off running. His breath was ragged, his body aching. Every step pushed him closer to freedom, or straight into a trap. Then, a sound behind him. Jacob froze. A voice. Low. Cold. You really thought we wouldn't be waiting for you? Jacob's blood turned to ice. He turned slowly, and there, blocking the exit, was a guard with a gun. And just like that, the escape had already gone wrong. Jacob's breath stalled in his chest. The guard stood at the end of the tunnel, his gun raised, his finger resting on the trigger. This wasn't just a guard doing his job. This was an executioner, one sent to make sure Jacob Daniels never left Cook County Jail alive. Jacob's mind raced. He had seconds to figure out his next move. Run? Nowhere to go. Fight? Against a gun? Suicide? Talk his way out? Not this time. The guard took a step closer, his boots echoing in the narrow space. On your knees, he ordered, his voice cold, detached. Jacob didn't move. The guard cocked his head. You deaf? Jacob's pulse pounded. He had been in bad situations before. But this was the end. Unless... Jacob's eyes flicked past the guard for just a fraction of a second. A doorway, just a few feet behind him. A chance. A tiny, desperate chance. He just had to get there. Jacob exhaled slowly. Then, he made his move. He lunged left, a fake, then twisted right, sprinting for the door. Bang! The gun fired, the shot whizzing past his ear, slamming into the concrete wall. Jacob threw himself forward, his feet barely touching the ground. 2 more steps. 1. Then, he dove through the doorway, crashing into the floor. Pain exploded through his ribs, but he didn't stop. He scrambled up, legs pumping, sprinting blindly into the darkness. Behind him, shouting, footsteps pounding. He had seconds before they caught up. Jacob darted left, then right, twisting through the tunnels, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Then, up ahead, light. The loading dock. His escape route. Jacob pushed harder, his body screaming in protest. Almost there. Then, another voice. Freeze. Another guard. Blocking the exit. Jacob's stomach twisted. Trapped. No way forward. No way back. And then, the sirens blared. Chaos exploded in the prison above. Shouting. Running. More sirens. Jacob didn't know what was happening, but he didn't stop to question it. Because the guard at the exit? He turned his head. Just for a split second. And that was all Jacob needed. He charged. The guard barely had time to react before Jacob slammed into him full force, knocking him off balance. The gun clattered to the ground. Jacob didn't fight. Didn't hesitate. He ran. Dove toward the loading dock. Right as the van's doors swung open, a figure inside reached out. Get in. Jacob didn't think. Didn't question. He jumped into the van. The door slammed shut behind him. And then, the vehicle roared to life. The tires screeched. The van peeled away from the loading dock, speeding toward the outer gates. Jacob sucked in a breath, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He had done it. He was outside Cook County Jail. But as he turned, staring at the driver of the van, his breath stalled. Because the person behind the wheel wasn't McAllister, wasn't Sarah. It was a stranger, a man with sharp, cold eyes and a scar running down his cheek. He didn't even look at Jacob as he sped down the highway, weaving through traffic like he had done this 1,000 times before. Jacob's gut twisted. This wasn't part of the plan. He wasn't in control. Who the hell are you? Jacob demanded. The man didn't answer, didn't even glance at him. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a burner phone, and tossed it onto Jacob's lap. It rang instantly. Jacob stared at it. His entire body was screaming at him not to pick it up, but he knew he didn't have a choice. He pressed the phone to his ear. Silence. Then, a voice. Calm. Smooth. Deadly. Well, Mr. Daniels, the voice said. I must say that was impressive. Jacob's stomach twisted. He knew that voice. Knew exactly who it belonged to. His worst nightmare. Judge Harrison. Jacob's hands went clammy. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't an escape. This was a setup. Judge Harrison chuckled on the other end. Did you really think, he said, his voice dripping with amusement, that you were getting out of this? Jacob's blood ran cold. He had just walked straight into the lion's den. And now, he was completely trapped. Jacob's breath stalled in his chest. Judge Harrison's voice was calm, steady. The voice of a man who knew he had already won. Jacob's hands clenched around the burner phone, his pulse pounding in his ears. This wasn't an escape. It was a setup. And now, he was in the hands of the one man who wanted him dead the most. Jacob forced himself to breathe. Think. He glanced at the driver, the man with the scar. The guy's face was blank, eyes locked on the road. A professional. Not a guard. Not a cop. Something worse. A fixer. A man who handled problems that couldn't be handled legally. And Jacob? He was the problem. He pressed the phone harder against his ear. What do you want, Harrison? The judge chuckled. Oh, Jacob. Still so mouthy. Jacob's jaw clenched. Let me guess, he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. This is where you kill me, right? Quietly? Make sure I disappear for good? Harrison exhaled, almost like he was bored. Oh, I could, he admitted. And believe me, I was tempted. Jacob's fingers curled into fists. But then I thought, why waste such an entertaining little pawn? Jacob's stomach twisted. Pawn. Not dead. Used. That was worse. I don't work for you, Jacob snapped. Harrison laughed softly. Oh, Jacob. That's adorable. The van turned sharply, throwing Jacob against the door. They weren't heading toward the city. They were going out of town. Into the dark. Jacob's pulse pounded. He was trapped. No weapons. No allies. And worst of all, he didn't even know where they were taking him. Harrison sighed on the other end of the phone. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Some streetwise con who can talk his way out of anything. Jacob didn't respond. But let's be honest, Jacob, Harrison continued. If that were true, you wouldn't be in this position, would you? Jacob's jaw tightened. The van slowed. They were pulling into some kind of facility. A warehouse? A compound? Too dark to tell. The driver killed the engine. The phone in Jacob's hand went dead. The silence was worse than the threats. Jacob knew what came next. A door opened. The driver turned in his seat, finally meeting Jacob's eyes. Out, he said, his voice flat. Jacob's muscles tensed. He could fight, but it wouldn't do anything. There was only one way to survive this. He had to play along. For now, Jacob stepped out of the van. The night was cold, the air sharp against his skin. They were at a private airstrip. A small plane sat waiting on the tarmac, its engines already running. Jacob's stomach twisted. They weren't just moving him. They were taking him somewhere far away. Heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Jacob didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Judge Harrison, dressed in a dark gray suit, perfectly polished, like he wasn't standing on a cold tarmac in the middle of the night, preparing to make someone disappear. Harrison stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. He studied Jacob for a long moment. Then, he smiled. Jacob hated that smile. I have to admit, Harrison said, you lasted longer than I expected. Jacob didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't show fear. Because fear? That's what men like Harrison thrived on. And Jacob refused to give it to him. Harrison sighed. I'm a reasonable man, Jacob. Jacob scoffed. Yeah, right. The judge's smile didn't fade. I was going to kill you, Harrison admitted. Make it clean. Quiet. Jacob's chest tightened. But then, I thought, why waste such a valuable opportunity? Jacob's stomach twisted. What do you want? He demanded. Harrison took a slow step forward. I want to make you an offer. Jacob stared. An offer? No. This was something else. A trap. You're out of options, Jacob, Harrison continued. Your sister is digging in places she shouldn't. And you? You've made too many enemies. Jacob's hands curled into fists. Sarah. Harrison knew. Of course he knew. You lay a finger on her. Jacob growled, and I will. Harrison held up a hand. Oh, relax. She's not in danger yet. Jacob's breathing was sharp, controlled. This was worse than death. Harrison wasn't here to get rid of him. He was here to own him. Harrison took another step closer. You want out of this, Jacob? You want your sister safe? Jacob didn't move, didn't answer. Harrison's smile widened. Work for me. Jacob's blood ran cold. Work for him? What the hell was he talking about? Harrison exhaled. I have loose ends that need cleaning up. Jacob's stomach dropped. This wasn't a job offer. This was enslavement. Harrison's voice softened. You do this for me, and I wipe the slate clean. No more charges. No more prison. Jacob's heart pounded. This was worse than he imagined. He had two choices. 1. Refuse and die. 2. Accept and become part of the system he spent his whole life fighting against. He couldn't win. Harrison already had him cornered. Jacob exhaled sharply. Then, he made his choice. He looked Harrison in the eye, and he smiled. "All right," Jacob said. "You win." Harrison grinned. Jacob extended a hand. Harrison reached out to shake it, and then Jacob grabbed him by the collar and yanked him forward, just as he slammed his forehead into Harrison's nose. Crack! Blood exploded down Harrison's face. He staggered back, clutching his nose, cursing. Jacob spun, elbowed the driver, grabbed the gun from his holster, and pointed it straight at Harrison's head. The guards froze. Silence. Harrison stared at him, his face covered in blood, his expression no longer amused. Jacob's hands were steady. His voice was calm. "You're right," Jacob said. "I don't know when to shut up." His finger tightened on the trigger. And then, the airstrip flooded with red and blue lights. Sirens blared. Cops. SWAT. Feds. Jacob's heart slammed in his chest. What the hell was happening? Then, through the chaos, he saw her. Sarah, standing with a man in a suit. A man Jacob recognized from the name on the burner phone. The man who had once tried to take down Judge Harrison. And now, he had returned. And Jacob? Jacob had just put a gun to the most corrupt judge in the city. Everything had just changed. The airstrip exploded with chaos. Red and blue lights flashed, sirens screamed, and the roar of car engines shook the ground. Jacob stood frozen, his heart pounding, the gun still pointed at Judge Harrison's bloodied face. Everything had flipped in an instant. 1 second, he was trapped, staring down his own execution. Now, the cavalry had arrived. Jacob's eyes snapped to Sarah, standing near the SUVs, her face set with determination. Beside her, the man from the burner phone, a man who had once gone to war with Judge Harrison and lost. And now, he was back for revenge. Harrison, still clutching his broken nose, finally let out a bitter laugh. "Well, isn't this something?" he muttered, blood dripping onto his collar. Jacob's grip tightened on the gun. He should pull the trigger. In this right now. But then, a voice boomed through the speakers of a police megaphone. "Drop your weapon. Hands in the air now." Jacob's body stiffened. Oh, hell no. The cops were here for him too. Harrison must have set the narrative before this even started. Jacob Daniels, escaped convict, armed and dangerous. The perfect excuse to put him down. Harrison turned, looking at the swarm of officers and agents descending on them. Then, he smiled. Jacob's stomach twisted. He knew that look. Harrison wasn't scared, because he had already figured out his way out of this. Jacob's pulse pounded. This wasn't over. Not even close. Jacob slowly lifted his hands, the gun dangling from his fingers. He wasn't stupid. He could take Harrison out right now. But then what? He'd be gunned down before he hit the ground. No. He needed to see how this played out. So, he did something he never thought he'd do. He dropped the gun. The second the weapon hit the ground, the agents rushed forward. 2 men grabbed Harrison, slamming him against a car. Another shoved Jacob to his knees, zip-tying his hands behind his back. His instincts screamed at him to fight, but he forced himself to stay still. Because if Sarah had done what he thought she had done, then this was the moment everything changed. An agent stepped forward, the man beside Sarah. Jacob recognized him now. His name was Ethan Monroe, former federal prosecutor, a man who had once tried to take down Harrison 10 years ago. And now? Now he was the only person who could finally finish what he started. Monroe walked up to Harrison, his face unreadable. Well, he said. "It's been a long time, Judge." Harrison snorted, wiping the blood from his nose. "Monroe," he said flatly, "didn't expect to see you again." Monroe smirked. "That's funny, because I always knew we'd get here." Harrison's expression didn't change. If he was worried, he didn't show it. Jacob watched, his chest tightening. If Monroe was here, if Sarah had gotten him involved, that meant they had something big. Something strong enough to put Harrison away. But did they have enough? Or was this about to blow up in their faces? Then, Monroe reached into his pocket, pulled out a flash drive, and Harrison's face finally changed. Just for a split second. But Jacob saw it. Real fear. "Yeah," Monroe said, watching the judge's reaction. "That's what I thought." Jacob's heart raced. What the hell was on that drive? Monroe didn't make them wait long to find out. He turned to the lead FBI agent. This drive contains financial records, case tampering evidence, and direct proof that Judge Harrison has been running a criminal enterprise for over 15 years. The air seemed to freeze. Jacob's eyes widened. They had it. They had everything. One of the agents grabbed Harrison's arms, pulling them behind his back. Harrison didn't fight, didn't even speak. Jacob had never seen a man so calm while his entire world burned down around him. The agent snapped the cuffs on. "Judge Harrison," he said, "you're under arrest." And just like that, the most powerful man in Chicago was done. Jacob should have felt relief, but he didn't, because Harrison wasn't acting like a man who had lost. Even as they shoved him into the back of a black SUV, even as the doors slammed shut, Harrison smirked. Jacob's gut twisted. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The moment Harrison was gone, Monroe turned to Jacob. "Get him up," he ordered. The agents pulled Jacob to his feet, but didn't uncuff him. Jacob frowned. I'm the reason this guy is going down, in case you missed that." Monroe's face was unreadable. "You're still an escaped convict." Jacob's chest tightened. "Oh, hell no." Sarah stepped forward. "Monroe, you promised." Monroe held up a hand, stopping her. "Jacob, listen to me," he said. "You just helped take down one of the most corrupt figures in this city." Jacob glared. And Monroe said, voice firm, "That means you just made a whole new set of enemies." Jacob's breath hitched. Monroe leaned in slightly. "If you think Harrison was the top of the chain," he whispered, "you're dead wrong." Jacob's stomach sank. This wasn't over. Not even close. Harrison was gone. But the system he built? The people he worked with? The ones who wanted Jacob dead? They were still out there. And now? They knew exactly who Jacob Daniels was. Monroe sighed. "We have a choice to make." Jacob clenched his jaw. "What choice?" Monroe studied him. "We can clear your name. You can go free." Jacob's chest lifted with hope. "But," Monroe continued, his voice grave, "you will be a marked man for the rest of your life." Jacob's hope shattered. "If you go back out there," Monroe said, "they will come for you. Sooner or later." Jacob's stomach twisted. "So what's the other option?" he asked. Monroe exhaled. "We make you disappear." Jacob froze. Disappear. A new life. A new identity. But that would mean losing everything. Sarah. His name. His past. Everything he had ever known. Silence stretched. Sarah looked at Jacob, her eyes filled with worry. Monroe waited. And Jacob? He realized he had one last choice to make. Stay and fight? Or vanish forever? Whatever he chose would change everything. Jacob's breath felt heavy in his chest. The choice in front of him was impossible. Go free, but spend the rest of his life being hunted. Or disappear forever. Both options felt like a death sentence in their own way. He looked at Sarah. She stood there, waiting, her arms crossed, trying to look strong. But he saw the way her fingers trembled. She knew. If Jacob chose to vanish, he'd be gone from her life forever. If he stayed, he'd be looking over his shoulder every second. There was no good answer. No easy way out. But Jacob Daniels had never been given easy choices. And he wasn't about to start now. Jacob took a slow breath, locking eyes with Monroe. "I'm not running," he said. Sarah let out a small gasp. Monroe's jaw tightened. "You sure about that?" Jacob nodded. Harrison was gone. But the people behind him? They weren't. The ones who had ordered his murder in prison. The ones who had protected Harrison for years. If Jacob disappeared, they'd keep doing what they were doing. They'd find another corrupt judge. Another system to control. And Jacob? He wasn't built to walk away. "I'm not running," he repeated. "I'm finishing this." Monroe studied him. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right," Monroe said. "Then we do this the hard way." Jacob exhaled. "Wouldn't be the first time." Monroe smirked. "No, I guess it wouldn't." The war begins. The next few days were a storm of chaos. With Harrison in federal custody, his entire empire started to crack. Names spilled. Deals were broken. Some of Harrison's allies turned on him immediately. Others? They fought back. Hard. It started with Sarah's car. One morning, she walked out of her apartment and found the windshield shattered. The words, "Stay out," spray painted on the hood. A warning. The next day, Monroe's office was ransacked. Files missing. Computers smashed. It was a message. This wasn't just about taking down a corrupt judge anymore. This was about destroying everything tied to him. And Jacob? He was target number one. The worst hit came a week later. Big Ray was stabbed in his cell. Jacob got the news from Monroe. Ray was still alive, but barely. Jacob's blood boiled. This wasn't over. The ones protecting Harrison? They were still out there. And they wanted revenge. Jacob clenched his fists. They thought they could bury him. They thought he'd be scared. They were dead wrong. Monroe set up a safe house for Jacob and Sarah. A rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. Jacob barely slept. He sat by the window, watching the streets, waiting for the next move. It wasn't if they'd come. It was when. Then. The attack finally came. The ambush. It was 2:13 a.m. when Jacob heard the sound. A car engine. Rumbling too close. Too slow. Like someone waiting. Watching. Jacob's stomach dropped. Then, the first gunshot shattered the window. "Get down!" Jacob shouted, grabbing Sarah and yanking her to the floor. More shots. Glass exploded. Bullets ripped through the motel walls. Jacob crawled to the dresser, yanking open the drawer. His fingers closed around the cold metal of a pistol, a gift from Monroe. Sarah was shaking, but her eyes were steady. "Who is it?" she whispered. Jacob peered through the bullet-riddled curtains. 3 men, dressed in black, moving with precision. Professional. This wasn't some random hit. They were here to finish what Harrison started. And Jacob? He wasn't about to let that happen. The fight for survival. Jacob moved fast. One of the gunmen was reloading. Jacob took the shot. The bullet hit his shoulder, sending him staggering back. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. Jacob didn't hesitate. He grabbed her wrist. "We need to move now." They bolted out the back. More shots rang out, missing by inches. Jacob's heart pounded. They ran into the alleyway behind the motel, Sarah panting beside him. Footsteps pounded behind them. They weren't alone. One of the gunmen rounded the corner. Jacob didn't think. He lunged forward, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting the gun away. A struggle. A knee to the ribs. A fist to the jaw. Then, bang. The gun went off. The man stiffened. Then, he dropped. Sarah gasped. Jacob stood there, panting, the body at his feet, his hands still gripping the gun. His first real kill. There was no time to process it. The other 2 men were still coming. Jacob grabbed Sarah's hand. "We need a car," he panted. Sarah's eyes were wide. "Where do we go?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "We end this." Sarah stared. "What does that mean?" Jacob's gaze hardened. "I'm done running." Sarah hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Jacob exhaled. This was it. The war had officially begun, and he wasn't going to stop until every last one of them was gone. As they ran into the night, Jacob knew one thing. The people after him? They had no idea who they were messing with. Jacob gripped the steering wheel tight, knuckles white, his foot pressed hard on the gas. The stolen SUV sped through the empty streets of Chicago, weaving between lanes, headlights cutting through the dark. Sarah sat beside him, breathing heavy, a pistol clutched in her hands. Behind them, hell was following. A black sedan, tinted windows. The last of Harrison's people. The men who had tried to bury Jacob in prison. The ones who had sent killers to silence him. And now, Jacob was leading them straight into the final fight. Sarah shot him a look. "Where are we going?" she asked. Jacob's jaw clenched. "To finish this." She stared, eyes filled with worry. "Jacob." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because this ended tonight. One way or another. The SUV tore through the city, heading toward the old shipping yard. A place no one went after dark. The perfect place for one last battle. Jacob skidded the SUV to a stop, tires screeching. Dust kicked up. Silence. Then, the black sedan rolled in behind them. Its doors opened. 4 men stepped out, dressed in black, armed. And in the middle? Judge Harrison. Jacob's breath stalled. He hadn't seen Harrison since the arrest, since the night on the airstrip. But now, here he was, standing free, untouched. like nothing had ever happened. Sarah's hands trembled. How is he? Jacob already knew. Harrison had bought his way out, just like he always did. The judge smiled, stepping forward. Jacob, he said, voice calm, steady. You really should have taken my deal. Jacob's fingers twitched around his gun. And you should have stayed in your cell. Harrison laughed softly. Come now, he said. You didn't really think some government suits could hold me forever, did you? Jacob stayed silent. He had always known that men like Harrison, they never stayed down for long. They slithered through the cracks, waited, plotted. And now, Harrison was here to kill him personally. Harrison sighed, shaking his head. I'll admit, you've been entertaining, he said. But this little game? It's over. He nodded to his men. Kill them both. Jacob moved first. Bang. His gun fired. One of Harrison's men dropped. Then chaos. Sarah ducked behind the SUV, firing wildly. Bullets ripped through the metal, shattering windows, ricocheting off steel crates. Jacob moved fast, rolling behind cover, breathing heavy. One of Harrison's men came around the side. Jacob whipped his arm up, fired twice. Dropped him. 3 down, 1 left. Jacob's breath was sharp, controlled. He peered around the SUV. The last man wasn't holding a gun anymore. Instead, he had a knife to Sarah's throat. Jacob's blood turned ice cold. Sarah struggled, her eyes wide with panic. Harrison smirked. Well, he asked. What now, Jacob? Jacob's pulse pounded. His gun was steady. His mind was racing. Harrison had him. Or at least, he thought he did. Jacob exhaled. Then, he dropped his gun. Harrison's smirk widened. Smart boy. Jacob lifted his hands. The man with the knife loosened his grip on Sarah's throat just slightly, and that was all she needed. Sarah stomped down on his foot, twisted hard, and drove her elbow straight into his ribs. The man gasped, stumbled, and in a flash, Sarah grabbed his gun. She didn't hesitate. Bang. The last of Harrison's men hit the ground. Jacob scooped his own gun back up, spinning toward Harrison. The judge froze. Jacob smiled. Your turn. Harrison laughed. Even now, he laughed. You think this changes anything? He asked. Jacob's eyes darkened. No, he admitted. But this will. And then, he shot him. Harrison's face twisted in shock. Blood bloomed on his suit. He staggered, gasping. Jacob stepped closer. Consider this contempt, he whispered. Then, one last shot. Right between the eyes. Harrison collapsed. For good. The end of an era. Silence. The shipping yard was still. The battle was over. Sarah stood frozen, chest heaving, her eyes locked on the judge's lifeless body. Jacob exhaled slowly. It was done. Sarah turned to him, her voice quiet. What now? Jacob looked down at Harrison's body, then at the dark city skyline beyond. Harrison had been one piece of the puzzle, but the system he built? It was still there. Jacob knew what that meant. There was still work to do. He turned to Sarah. Now, he said. His voice was calm, certain. Now, we burn the whole thing down. And as Jacob walked into the night, stepping over the corpse of the man who had tried to destroy him, he knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of something bigger, something unstoppable, because Jacob Daniels wasn't going to stop until every last one of them was gone, for good.